Good morning. We're enjoying an early fall day. I remember calling it Indian summer. It's a little early for fall here in Taiwan, unfortunately, as it is my favorite time of year. But it's made all the more precious in Taiwan because it doesn't last more than a couple weeks until we get to our relatively mild winters. But it is enjoyable after a long spell of heat. And I suspect my experience has been that the heat will be back and last most of October and really to early November. But anyway, in the spirit of fall, I just want to say how great it is to be alive, truly. And as kind of a toast, the other day I think you saw me with a much larger cup, and this is espresso day. I have Americano day, which is essentially espresso watered down, and then I have espresso days. I stagger them, so smaller cup. How lovely. A favorite friend sends me coffee that her father roasts the beans. It's become, coffee since I'd been here, it's become a much more appreciated art. I remember when I first came here, there was a couple, not many, coffee houses. I think Japanese chain of all things. And I remember that on my way here I was in Japan and Starbucks had made its presence known, just opening Starbucks in Japan. This is 1997, early 1997. And at the time I remember reading the paper, well, Starbucks will never be suitable for the Taiwan market. Well, now they're ubiquitous. My little town here in Hualien of 100,000 people has 3. Anyway, the coffee culture. And it's been a welcome development for me because I've always appreciated coffee and take the effort to brew it carefully. Anyway, my friend's father is home roasting. So thanks to you out there for coffee time. So now that I've had my coffee and talked about the weather, where are we going today? Well, appreciating clarity, as I've shared. Clarity for me came through silence, just as I'd been promised by the Raja Yoga that I had practiced so diligently, just as I had promised that once the mind could be first turned down, or first ignored, maybe turned down, and then silence. That was where clarity rested, on the silencing of the monkey mind, the chatter, the nonsense that it's so prone to. But this experience of silence remains elusive. I embrace it when it comes. And as I've learned to make my day basically a study in meditation, it started with rigorous sitting, discipline, straight, no moving, all the self-imposed sacrifice to do it correctly. Form was so important. But all this practice, 30 years of this diligent practice, this Raja Yoga, they call the royal path, the path most known to Westerners. So well known, in fact, that most Westerners that get into Zen think it's about this quieting, silencing the mind, conquering. It's an active process, conquering the mind. Well, I've always been a more passive kind of person. I've always let the world come to me. But in this one instance, I pushed and struggled, sweated in my meditation practice. Consistently, I developed a practice that I was able to persist, but it certainly wasn't the pleasant la 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 land that many people thought, that I thought too, meditation was about. Relaxing, calming. But mine always retained an element of vigilance, attentive vigilance, until it didn't any longer, until I chose to let it go. And only when I really started looking at silence as a state of being, and there lurked clarity, which is the end goal of my Raja Yoga practice. Well, simultaneously I was practicing Jnana Yoga, the path of taking information to knowledge and creating wisdom. And this definitely needed my mind as an active participant in this process. So I was practicing the two yogas simultaneously, which is not unusual. Yoga simply means union. And what's better to unify these two approaches? But I ended up essentially discarding one. But there's elements that overlap, as in everything. The study of the masters, the study of their words, of their teachings, of their dharma, is an overlapping theme. Looking at the history the development of the spiritual process, the spiritual path. Studying certain adepts, masters, gurus, studying and seeing what impacted me. But today, in my teachings, what I call bouts of clarity is my intended focus. That's the direction I'm going to. Bouts, a bout of coughing. Usually bout doesn't really have a wholesome connotation. It's sort of like fit, having a bout. And I could apply that word just as easily, having a fit of clarity. And clarity was always my end goal because it was so far from who and what I always was. Able to see both sides of the argument. Able to look at someone argue about nature and say, and on the other hand, nurture and listen just as carefully and say, well, this is the way of the world as I've come to see it now, recognizing that there is a unity and it's perfectly acceptable. I reconcile the fact that diametrically opposed, apparent diametrically opposed worldviews could be equally so at the same time without my brain exploding. And this has been a hallmark, I found after the experience, this has been a hallmark of the awakening process, the journey from progressive to permanent awakening, is this aha moment. And it happens coupled with the understanding that everything that you thought was you and yours indeed wasn't. So you're losing the egoic structure. At the same time, you're reconciling these polarities. And this led to a fit of belly laughing. Just big tears of laughter. And pretty soon, the tears that came from joy turned to tears of sorrow. Just as the bouts of laughter turn to its polarity, weeping. And then guess what? It's really a roller coaster because the laughter returned. And this went on for an indeterminable amount of time. I didn't know how long it took. The whole adventure from a sitting meditation lasted a couple days. And unfortunately, as I had a Monday through Friday job, wasn't it great that it happened on a Saturday morning and wrapped up on a Sunday afternoon, and Monday I was right back to work, even though I was aware that nothing was any longer the same. That I saw the world, felt the world, heard the world, tasted the world anew. And I want to say at this point that because I've never been extremely vested in reality, always been a dreamer, always entertained the idea that was dreaming when I was awake and awake when I was asleep. So I didn't have a vested interest in the structure. I kind of knew that the ego, my ego, was kind of like my monkey on my back. I love monkeys. Scared of them sometimes though, but curious. Here in Taiwan, on my favorite hike, I get to come face to face with monkeys. And these are big monkeys. The male stands 3/4 of my height. And he looks a lot stronger and quicker as he's protecting his females and youngsters. No eye contact. I learned quickly. Do not challenge him. Do not feed them either, because that emboldens them. And they'll come and attack you, rob you, take your food if you don't give it to them. So people here have finally learned the lesson of not feeding the monkeys. Let them forage, let them find their sources of food as they always have. But monkeys look for shortcuts, just as they look for the easiest way, just as most of us do. They mimic human behavior. So the monkey on my shoulder, I knew I wasn't vested in this heavy identity. I didn't find my identity in reality with a little r. I always yearned for reality writ large, capital reality. I knew that I just needed to lift the veil. And my drive for clarity is that because I could entertain, because I could always accept opposites and make room for opposites, accommodate opposites, apparent opposites in my life. And because I was a skeptic, I always doubted everything that came from my senses. Particularly doubted what people said. I was always more interested in watching how they lived rather than paying too much attention to what they said. Words could catch my interest, but words alone couldn't sway me. So this doubt, this inborn skepticism, the ability to wait, watch, and most importantly, listen. But listen to the inner workings, both of my mind and my body, and most importantly, my heart. Because these things were all involved in the process of taking me from a pretty consistent state of confusion. I was and am confused. The difference being now I understand. I'm relaxed in my confusion. I accepted my confusion as part of my process. I let the rigor of Raja Yoga, the discipline of self-inflicted discipline, discomfort, and let it go. In the process, I learned that I also need to pay attention to my physical body. Let it talk to me. Let it tell me what it needs to patiently listen. And in the process of searching this clarity, I guess because I was in a constant state of confusion, but let me say, never in turmoil. This confusion was a lot more comfortable than that. It doesn't make me uncomfortable to not know what's going on. And I think this prepared me for the condition, the recognition, the realization that essentially we never know what's going on. We learn to adapt, persevere, and accept that there's an infinite more that we won't know in comparison to what we do come to know. What we come to know is that maybe the best answer to any question is don't know. I love the liberation of not feeling as I had to know. And this is what Raja Yoga drove me so hard and made me feel at times a failure in my spiritual work, that I was uncomfortable not knowing, and I was determined to know. And this persisted until I came to the understanding that so much will remain unknown. Now I look at this as the blessing it truly is. What a burden it would be to know everything. I certainly know the pursuit to know everything was a burden. Giving that up with a simple acceptance, prompted by the primary motivation in the whole process, surrender. Surrender. That's let it go. that just, those words just permeate my body and just take the edge off, if there is one anymore. Round that edge, round it off. So why bouts of clarity? Because now, as I've started to mention, and I maybe digressed, there's so many directions to go. So bear with me when I go off on a tangent, but I love doing it, let me tell you. Maybe my best work is when I'm off on a tangent. My greatest insights have come from that seeming wandering of the mind, which I'd spent so many years trying to discipline, trying to straitjacket, and never accomplish. All I could do is trick the mind, fool the mind, and then ultimately use the mind for the fine tool it is. And accepting that the mind is ours, is mine, to teach me, to show me, to help me understand what's not so. And then its job is done. And it's clear, as long as you thank your mind, thank you, thank you, thank you, appreciate it as a tool, a beautiful, wonderful, amazing tool, perhaps the only tool in our arsenal. So I was talking about moving meditation, moving my life into a constant meditative state. And there's still room for sitting. And it's when I'm sitting, the common acceptance of meditation, when I'm sitting, bouts of clarity come. And I'm so busy appreciating them because of their rarity. I cannot do anything to prompt about a fit of clarity. It just comes and goes of its own free will, as if it had a mind of its own. And in this appreciation of silence, in the clearness of clarity, crystal clearness, I really don't have any time to figure out what my mind is doing. Obviously, for those brief experiences, or apparently is a better word than obviously, apparently, skepticism here, doubt, apparently, my mind was silenced because I'm not aware of any activity. But again, brief. Now, clarity and joy are closely related. And I had a vision of the enlightenment process as leading to clarity, joy, which combine to be bliss. But I found out early on that maintaining a physical body and being in a state of constant bliss was not doable, not achievable. Perhaps if I would have been cloistered, if I would have been in a temple in the mountains somewhere, a cave, where I could just be bliss, or I could just be in that state. And remember, even in a cave, in a temple somewhere, someone has to be taking care of you. Someone has to provide sustenance, shelter. Even though it can be a minimum, some structure has to be in place to allow you the luxury of being in a constant state of bliss. Well, that was one I had to provide for my needs. I had to participate, actively participate in preparation, financing the needs of my physical body. Didn't have that structure. But probably more importantly, I didn't see how I could remain in my body in this state of bliss. You just want to follow your light, the light. You just want to go and dwell in the light. And I suspect that when a master adept passes, that it is the compelled by the state of bliss to leave the body behind. And for the longest time I thought, well, I want to stay in the body. So bliss is, again, a blessing when it happens, just as so bouts of bliss, bouts of joy. But my jhana yoga knowledge gave me a gift that I didn't anticipate, and I never actively sought. This was equanimity, the ability to accept what's happening moment by moment, being content with whatever the world brings your way.